everyone. I should say vesperal salutations to you all, as she would say in translations. But you're all very welcome here to the home place. I mean, I can't think of a more opposite and evocative setting to commemorate Brian Friel's work, especially in the 10th year since his passing. And to celebrate also the extraordinary artistic and intellectual achievement of Field Day Theatre Company, especially to do so in conversation with Brian's co-founder of the company, Stephen Ray. I've just frightened Stephen because I'm staying in Kilray tonight, and it's a place that understandably leaves him anxious. Anyhow, we're all congregated here in a place. Slow audience but it's lovely to be here in a place named honorifically after Seamus Heaney, who of course was a great friend and collaborator with Stephen and Brian as a fellow member of Field Day, for whom he wrote his play The Cure Troy in 1990. And whilst that may seem strangely serendipitous, it's got feck all to do with serendipity, but very much to do with the brilliant organisation of Shauna McNeely, and I'd like to pay tribute to her for organising this evening's event. And for bringing together two estranged brothers, because we have both Manus and Owen from translations here. Of course, Stephen played Owen in the original production of Translations in 1980, and we have a former student of mine, Seamus O'Hara, who has played Manus in 3 productions of Translations in just a few years. So it's wonderful to have Seamus here too, also as a co-celebrant for this evening's performance. He also performed in Station Island as well too, which is, if you see that the next time it's on the road, it's a beatific, beautiful performance. My name is Mark Phelan. I had to take a look at my notes for that. I work at Queen's University, where we are very, very happy and honoured to host the Brian Friel Theatre, which, to quote from Owen in Translations, bang, you name something and it leaked into existence. And that happened in 2009 when we had the Brian Friel Theatre christened or consecrated at Queen's University in a ceremonia nominationis Dulce? Too slow, right? Too slow. O'Hara?
A ceremony of naming!
Good man, good students, taught him well. But a ceremony of naming. And actually, at that ceremony of naming, a tribute to Brian was delivered by Seamus Heaney, and it was a very moving and memorable speech about the life and legacy and the importance of Brian for his work. And one of the things that Seamus said, it was a line that was luminous and has long been lodged in my memory ever since, like a bird in my brain. He said that Brian was a shy showman who shunned the public spotlight, for he preferred the privacy of his psychic citadel in Donegal, which is characteristically Seamus. Beautiful line, and it's very true for Brian. It's also very true for Stephen Ray, who is also a very private man, even though paradoxically he's attained extraordinary international acclaim and fame for his work on stage, radio, screen and television. I'm sure everybody here is familiar with Stephen's work in a slew of iconic roles on film and television. But for me, if you haven't seen the real Stephen on stage, you haven't seen Stephen. Not really. Because when you're sitting in the dark and staring at the light, you're always conscious of what really great actors are and what they're like. And Stephen has an uncanny ability to charm and disarm in such a range of different roles. And an astonishing physical and vocal dexterity as well too. I mean, even in the last couple of years, if you've seen him in the Savage play Cypress Avenue by David Ireland, he's malevolently mesmerising as a middle-aged man who murders his entire family, 3 generations of them, and yet you still feel a scintilla of sympathy for the devil at the end of it. It's an astonishing feeling. And even from the ferocity of that play, just a couple of years ago, he was playing Friel forlorn figure of crap in Beckett's Daughter Smashed to Piece Crap's Last Tape. A play that was in a sublime production that was staged here in Dublin and then off to Melbourne, going to New York apparently as well too. And it came about as a production that took decades in the making, because Stephen archived himself as a younger actor, recording the younger versions of crap, a process that can only be described as stages of crap, I would imagine. A description for my kind of career. But, you know, so he's an extraordinary kind of actor. And I think, look, I could rehearse all of the career highlights of Stephen's career. He was up all night writing this introduction. So, but, you know, last year, in 2024, the Irish Film and Television Awards presented him with a Lifetime Achievement Award. The Irish Times Special Tribute Award was given to him 10 years ago, and I think that's only appropriate for an actor who has worked, when you think about it, with Sam Shepard, with Samuel Beckett, with Stuart Parker from Belfast, with Harold Pinter, and of course with the greatest playwright in the English language, Brian Friel. And so I can't think of a better person to have here today to discuss the legacy and the importance of Friel's work and the work of Field Day. So can I ask you all just to show your appreciation to him? That's us finished, Stephen, we're away. Stephen, can I ask, I mean, everybody here is familiar with yourself and your work, and will be familiar with, and have seen or read the work of Field Day or been influenced or inspired by it. I was just wondering if you could reflect a little bit upon the original impetus and inspiration for yourself and Brian setting up Field Day in 1980.
I don't know what was going on with Brian particularly at the time, but I done a good. I worked with Brian the first time in Freedom of the City, in the London production, and I found that extraordinary, a wonderful experience. Albert Finney directed it, and it was just marvelous, you know, because Albert said, we got to do this play now. This is happening now. You know, it's just a year after Bloody Sunday, and he put his staked his entire reputation on doing this play because he believed they should interfere in what was actually happening in our little country, and so it was a marvelous feeling. And then Brian came in, and it was just great, you know. It's a wonderful play, and I got on very well with Brian, and I met Anne Friel on the opening night and got on very well with her too, and that's also important, you know. And so then I think I did Aristocrats in the Abbey, and then I was home in Belfast in summer from the Arts Council. What's her name?
Imelda Foley?
Imelda Foley told me that there was money around because nobody had the nerve to put on plays with the troubles going on, you know. So I said, I'll have that. Anyway, so I phoned Brian Muff 3-0, I think. and I went over there to see him, and it was very straightforward. I just said, look, there's some money around in the Arts Council, and I wondered if we could, you know, put a company together and do a play of yours. He said, yeah. And he says, I'm working on one at the moment, and that was the play was Translations, which is a highly significant, wonderful play for us to do in the context of the political situation here, you know. So it happened, I think, and can confirm it, you know, it happened as straightforwardly as that. And then the Derry City Council, who by now were actually had Catholics in it, you know, said, we'd love you to come here and do it in the Guildhall. So it was simple.
I think you said it was a series of happy accidents.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, then the whole thing, the whole Field Day thing became bigger than that, you know, but nothing's bigger than that, but it was just, yeah, I see, I'd always wanted to have a company, you know, and a lot of my time in London, I was preparing myself to come home, you know, and do something, but I couldn't have dared think that Brian would just say, yeah, you know, and so I think it began a wonderful, wonderful time for both himself and myself, and people felt a kind of great uplift, which, you know, that only theatre can do, you know, and you know, people would say to me, I've never been in a theatre before, but this is incredible, and it was turning our heads away from the increasing negativity of the political situation here, and it was exciting to go all around Ireland and do translations in all these different parish halls. And so, what was the question?
I don't know if it's a question, it was an awful question, but it was a good answer. Stuart Parker was a player who also wrote latterly for Field Day. He once talked about how, follow on from that comment that you made about the political situation at the time, he said that politicians were visionless to a man and increasingly retreating behind sectarian stockades. So it's incumbent upon artists to intervene. And, you know, Field Day, I know you say it almost happens almost like kind of chance and this lovely kind of collaboration with an affinity that develops between yourself and Brian. But Field Day are also seen very much as synonymous with the ideas of the Fifth Province and publications and whatnot. But when you kind of set up the company, was there a conscious engagement or commitment to make a cultural intervention into politics, given the paralysis that prevailed at the time?
Well, I think that once we had made a cultural intervention with the production of translations and an all-Ireland tour of it, it became it grabbed us by the whammies, you know, and you could see that we'd created a space that needed to be filled again and again. We really only started to do one play, but then we had to, as a company, we had to have a board of, and so we picked a board which basically picked itself. Heaney, Dean, Hammond, Thomas Kilroy was later, but yeah. And of course, you know, like Heaney and Dean came tearing in the door with loads of ideas, you know, and publications and pamphlets and you know, the anthology. It was an incredible time, you know, and I'm so proud that Dean got an identity that was outside of the academy, you know. I mean, Seamus Heaney had his identity, which was one of the greatest poets ever, and Brian and I were theatre people, but I thought it was a wonderful opportunity for Seamus Dean.
And I mean, you've talked to me a little bit before about this notion of Field Day as a company that sought to explore the notion of the Fifth Province. You were a little bit more kind of sceptical about that in terms of, say, it was more something that was attributed by writers like Richard Kearney to Field Day as opposed to maybe something that was a core kernel belief of the company itself.
I don't remember us talking about it at any great length. You know, the Fifth Province had been, you know, embraced by Richard Kearney, and of course it's terribly interesting. You know, County Meath was where all the kings went to live, and that was the province. That was the Fifth Province. But in a way, if we had a Fifth Province, it was Derry, you know, and Donegal. But you know, we embraced the whole of Ireland as well. You know, and that. I mean, I do think. Sorry, this isn't quite. I do think the original Abbey Theatre was a great model in that what Yeats and Lady Gregory did was original in putting together the native Irish people with the Anglo-Irish and with treating Ireland as a separate entity which could make its own decisions about itself. But then I think it became kind of tied up with their own kind of establishment beliefs, and it was time for us to, and we found ourselves taking that on board. So that was our fifth province, you know.
I think he talked about the fifth province of the imagination, that idea that the arts could perhaps kind of carve out a place or a space that could transcend tribes and turf and territory, and some utopian idea that the arts could bring people together. But I suppose in some ways that kind of did happen in terms of translations, because you've spoken before about, for instance, the remarkable stand innovation that the play generated. I know everybody vertically applauses today, but back then stand innovations were a little bit more rare, and it was led by
Marlene Jefferson. Yeah. And I thought the opening night was tight enough experience. It was people were nervous. It's a difficult space, the Guildhall, and a new, very great play. We were only beginning to discover it anyway, and we were standing, and Marlene Jefferson was in the front row, and
do you want to maybe explain who, for some people who may not know who that was?
Marlene Jefferson was the mayor of Derry at that time. She was a unionist, and I can assure you she was a lovely person. And she, when the lights went down and the people all started to applaud, and I thought, could it be better, the applause? Marlene stood up and applauded, and everybody followed. It was like, the Handel's Messiah, when the king stands up, the citizens have to stand up. Well, all the citizens stood up, and it was really, she was really marvelous, And I remember saying to her, because she was a unionist, and I said, Marlene, you've been very kind to us while we were here. Thank you very much indeed. And she said, Stephen, all I care about is Derry. There's people here, she said, they would let themselves lose money and take business out of Derry. She said, but I love Derry. So I think that's a great thing to say. And she was a marvellous woman. So, yeah.
And speaking of Derry, obviously Derry is a city that's on the edge of kind of partition, cut off from its natural hinterland in Donegal, where Brian was living and where Translations is set. And Derry too was also a crucible of the civil rights movement, where some of the worst injustices were concentrated in the city. But what was the gravitation towards Derry? It wasn't simply because Brian was living just across the border. Can you talk a little bit more about the significance and symbolism of Derry for Friel Day? Because they go hand in glove together in many ways.
Well, as soon as the council knew that we were planning this, I don't know, maybe Brian went and spoke to them about it, but they were desperate to get us to come to Derry and to do it in the Guildhall, because it was a huge statement, because as they used to say, you could, a Catholic couldn't sweep the floor in the Guildhall. And it was a massive cultural takeover. And to do a truly great play, which really, the more often you read it or think about it, it's a hugely important play, not just about Ireland, but then, some of us saw the Ukrainian theatre company coming to, they came to the Abbey and did, Tony Connolly, the journalist from Derry, phoned me and said, have you got a photograph of the original company? And because they were doing a production in Ukraine, in Kiev, and I said, don't worry about that. Why don't you bring them to Dublin, or why don't you bring them to Ireland? That was an amazing production. I think that's the best production I've ever seen, because those people were living the moment they were living in. You know, they were absolutely living the intrusion of the Russians, and they felt it more than we did about the English intrusion, you know, at the time. And I thought it was a great lesson for us, you know. Wonderful acting.
This was a production of the National Theatre of Ukraine. They staged it in the Abbey Theatre in 2023, I think it was, just a couple of years ago. I remember being there too, and it was large. I'd never been in an audience. It seemed to be the only local, because the audience was almost entirely comprised of exiled Ukrainians. But the entire production was actually performed in Ukrainian. And I remember talking to some of the audience members at the interval and saying, you know, the play, is it Ukrainian or Russian they're speaking? And they were saying Ukrainian, and they were saying, well, it should be Russian that they're speaking. And I nearly got punched. You know? I was trying to explain the dramaturgy of that in relation to translations, but they weren't having it. You know? And it seemed to me that, you know, for them the revolution is certainly not over. You know,
no, absolutely not. And you know, there was the girl playing Sarah, the dumb girl. Her father was in the Ukrainian army, and she said he's fighting away, and she said he was aged 60, and they said, you're too old to go to war. And he said, this is my country. I'm going to fight for it. And I thought that was, and you see, even at the end when they came on and did a kind of dance, and it was, instead of it finishing, oh my God, what's going to happen now? You know, and Hugh says we've got to embrace this new regime in some way. And they said they came on and they danced, basically saying we're not going to take this. We are not taking this. And I hope it works for them. I really do. But you know, Trump and Putin, you know.
I mean, what is it? Because obviously the Ukrainian production was spectacular, but there also was a recent production to the National Theatre in London, staged it with Seamus. We're going to hear from him very soon, and also there's an Abbey and lyric co-production of translations that performed in Donegal and Belfast and Dublin. Katrina McLaughlin, who's now Donegal woman, who's now at the helm of the Abbey, directed that. I mean, what is it about the play, do you feel, looking back since the original production in 1980? What is it about the play in terms of the political voltage and valency that it continues to possess today?
Well, I mean, of course, the Ukrainian thing, it just meant everything to them. But at the time, to be perfectly honest, I didn't know how significant it was. I mean, we had 6 weeks to rehearse it, and we did it, but we were finding that play very slowly, you know, and you know, doing a play in the Guildhall is difficult. There's no theatrical background to it, you know. You've got to create it yourself, and it grew with us when we toured, and people got it, and then after a while, not Maureen Jefferson, but other people who you would describe as unionists started to try and find fault in it. You know, like certain people said, it's old wine in new bottles, you know. And
let's not name any names, that was Edna Longley. Old wines with WH.
Yeah, I know, and the truth is, what's so offensive about that remark is, it's a continuing whine because the problems have not been sorted out. You know, there still was an argument about the Irish Language Act. No, you couldn't have that. I mean, absolutely disgraceful, you know. But luckily then, everybody in West Belfast went crazy and learned Irish, you know. and you know, and then we have kneecap, you know, so it's really, it's sublime, you know. You know, and the guys were learning Irish in Monkesh and everything. There's a doorman and that pub at the bottom of the Falls Road. you can't go in if you don't speak Irish. It's changing, you know. It is changing, and you know, to say it's old wine, new bottles thing. She's saying there's an order here now, and so you'd better shut up and obey it. Well, that's not going to happen.
It's also a spectacular misreading of the play, because I think Edna Longley says that there's an old wine in new bottles, that it recreates this nationalist narrative that this is some lovely relapsarian Ireland that is ruined by the English. And you go, the play mentions the sweet smell of the rot in the potatoes. You have half the cast, one's completely intoxicated and stocious, and others nearly senile. You have Manus, who's lame. You have, his paramour who's trying to leave the country. Half the country is emigrated kind of anyway. This idea that and in fact, Yolland, who's intoxicated with the landscape and the language and the lassies, he's the only romantic in it. And when he keeps rhapsodising about how beautiful the place is, everybody mocks him and says, one good hot summer and you think it's Eden. So it's a play which is actually a really anti-romantic play. So for anybody to misread the play as some sort of romantic, idyll of an Ireland that was ruined by Britain, it's an astonishing misreading in many ways.
Yeah, but it's deliberate, and it's obvious the source of that.
Well, we'll come back to that in a wee moment. It might be a good juncture, perhaps, to have the first excerpt read by Seamus O'Hara from the.
Owen. Two friends of mine are waiting outside the door. They'd like to meet you, and I'd like you to meet them. May I bring them in? Hugh, certainly. You'll all eat and have, Owen. Not just yet, Father. You've seen the sappers working in this area for the past fortnight, haven't you? Well, the older man is Captain Lancey. He's the cartographer in charge of this whole area. Cartographer, James! Owen begins to play this game, his father's game. Partly to involve his classroom audience, partly to show he has not forgotten it, and indeed partly because he enjoys it. Jimmy, a maker of maps! Owen, indeed. And the younger man that I have travelled with from Dublin, his name is Lieutenant Yolland, and he is attached with the toponymic department. Father, responde. He gives names to places. Indeed. Although he is in fact an orthographer. Doty, too slow. Manus, the correct spelling of those names. Indeed. Owen laughs and claps his hands. Some of the others join in. Beautiful. Honest to God, it's such a delight to be back here again with all of you civilized people. Anyhow, may I bring them in? Your friends are our friends. Oh, one small thing, Father. I'm on their payroll. You haven't enlisted, have you? Me, a soldier. I'm employed as a part-time, underpaid civilian interpreter. My job is to translate the quaint, archaic tongue you people persist in speaking into the King's good English. Owen enters with Lancey and Yolland. Captain Lancey is a middle-aged, a small, crisp officer, expert in his field as a cartographer, but uneasy with people, especially civilians. Especially these foreign civilians. His skill is with deeds, not words. Lieutenant Yolland is in his late 20s, early 30s. He's tall and thin and gangling, blonde hair, a shy, awkward manner, a soldier by accident. Owen. Here we are. Here we are, Captain Lancey and Lieutenant Yolland, both Royal Engineers, my father. And I make no other introductions except that these are some of the finest people of Bellaghy and what? Well, you're among the best people in Ireland now. He pauses to allow Lancey to speak. Lancey does not. Would you like to say a few words, Captain? I'll say what I have to say, if I may, and as briefly as possible. Do they speak any English, Roland? Oh, don't worry, I'll translate. I see. He clears his throat. He speaks as if he were addressing children, a shade too loudly and enunciating excessively. You may have seen me walking in this section. Walking. We are here, in this place. You understand? To make a map, and did this place, you understand? Jimmy, non è latine loquitur? Lancy to Jimmy. I do not speak Gaelic, sir. He looks at Owen. Carry on. A map is a representation on paper. A picture, you understand? Picture. A paper picture showing, representing this country. Yes? Showing your country in miniature. A scale drawing of paper of suddenly Dorothy sniggers, then Bridget, then Sarah. Owen leaps in quickly. It might be better if you assume they understand you. Yes? And I'll translate as you go along. I see, yes, very well. Perhaps you're right. Well, what we're doing is this. He looks at Owen nods reassuringly. His Majesty's government has ordered the first ever comprehensive survey of this entire country. A general triangulation which will embrace detailed hydrographic and topographic information and which will be executed to a scale of 6 inches to the English mile. A new map is being made of the whole country. Lancy looks at Owen. Is that all? Owen smiles reassuringly and indicates to proceed. This enormous task has been embarked on so that the military authorities will be equipped with up-to-date and accurate information on every corner of this part of the empire. Our job is done by the soldiers because they are skilled in this work. And also so that the entire basis of land valuation can be reassessed for the purposes of more equitable taxation. This new map will take the place of the estate agent's map so that from now on you will know exactly what is yours in law. In conclusion, I wish to quote 2 brief extracts from the white paper, which is our governing charter. All former surveys of Ireland originated in forfeiture and violent transfer of property. The present survey has for its object the relief which can be afforded to the proprietors and occupiers of land from unequal taxation. The captain hopes that the public will cooperate with the sappers and that this new map will mean that taxes are reduced. Ireland is privileged. No such survey is being undertaken in England, so this survey cannot but be received as proof of the disposition of this government to advance the interests of Ireland. My sentiments too. This survey demonstrates the government's interest in Ireland, and the captain thanks you for listening so attentively to him. What sort of translation was that, Owen? Did I make a mess of it? You weren't saying what Lancy was saying. Uncertainty in meaning is incipient poetry. Who said that? There was nothing uncertain about what Lancy said. It is a bloody military operation, Owen. And what's Yolland's function? What's incorrect about the place names we have here? Nothing at all. They're just going to be standardised. Oh, you mean changed into English? Well, there's ambiguity. Where there's ambiguity, they'll be anglicised. And they call you Roland. They both call you Roland. Shh. Isn't it ridiculous? They seem to get it wrong from the very beginning, or else they can't pronounce Owen. I was afraid some of you bastards would laugh. Aren't you going to tell them? Yes, soon. Oh, but easy, man, easy. Owen, Roland. What the hell? It's only a name. It's the same me, isn't it? Well, isn't it? Indeed it is. It is the same Owen. Not the same Manus. And in a way, we complement each other.
But I think O'Hara is Irish for human etch-a-sketch. Something terrific. Thank you very much, Seamus.
Can I just say that, with Brian we had, he was so brilliant. He was always anticipating the issues, and the thing about freedom of the city, he did it when nobody else would have dared do something about it, and this he smelt the issue at the centre of translations, you know, and that it was now as contemporary as it had always been. That's the strength of his genius.
It's a history play about the future in many ways. Yeah, it's astonishing. And also it's so interesting that you talk about the first play you collaborated on was Freedom of the City, set in the Guildhall in the aftermath of a civil rights kind of riot. And then you are in the Guildhall just a few years later doing translations and the rest of the work by Friel. It's fascinating.
I know.
To kind of just to pull on the loose thread at the end of that excerpt that was done beautifully by Seamus, the kind of casually dismissive way that Roland Owen is about it's just a name, and yet this is a play that opens with the naming rituals of Nellie Rue's baby. But the kind of the casual way he says it's just a name, and yet we still live in a society that we have little consensus over names. You know, what do we even call this place? The Northern Ireland, Ulster, the 6 counties. I know you like to call it the province, but Stuart Parker says it's a place so fundamentally fractious we can't even fucking agree what to call it.
No.
Did you have any sense of when you were rehearsing this play that this is a play that would speak to where we live?
No, I think we were just trying to. Yeah, we were just learning about it. I mean, you know, when a new play, you're always learning about it as you go. You know, and you discover something about it. A great play, you discover it all the time. You know, so you know, it's a huge play, and it grew the more we did it.
I remember there's a lovely, I just have a wee quotation here from Brian himself, who's obviously a very reticent man, didn't really like to explain or do interviews or to explain his work, but he said in an interview with McGill magazine that fundamentally the irony of this play is that it should have been written in Irish. But the fact that the play is written in English works brilliantly as a theatrical conceit, in that the Irish and the English characters speak to each other in English but completely don't understand each other, and it seems that the only Irish is spoken in the play are the place names themselves. But surely that simple device of everybody speaking English is completely critical to the complexity and the ambivalence of the play, isn't it? I mean, can you maybe talk a little bit about that, or your reflections or memories of all of that?
you go on.
I'm bored of myself here. But I mean, so Seamus Heaney said that he thought that the play's attitude to Irish was a mixture of irony and elegy, which I always thought was a lovely kind of phrase.
Well, you know, it's funny when people want to do a film of translations, and I remember that was mooted quite early on, and I said to Brian that whatever you do, don't let them change the central device of the play, which is that it's all spoken in one language. And I think that would remove the writer from it. You know, anybody could do it in 2 languages. You know, it's so clever. But you know, people more and more, you know, and film is too literal a lot of the time. You know, they do it with subtitles. You know, and that's the brilliance of the play. You know, it's the playwright working at his best. You know,
It makes me think of Black 47, in which you played this wonderful Busicoldian character set during the famine, and the central character there refuses to speak English, especially when he's in the court and speaks only in Irish. I know it's in a slightly different context, but
well, I mean, of course, you see, if this, we were doing this in 1980, you know, the thing was that the Irish language had received terrible damage because there wasn't a huge population of Irish speakers, not the way it should have been. And there are more now, you know, but the way to get across this play was to make everybody feel that they were listening to Irish and the tyranny of English.
I mean, you've already mentioned, I mean, there was unanimous critical praise for translations when it first opened. A huge kind of acclaim that this was a masterpiece and an extraordinarily important moment in Irish kind of theatre and the cultural history of Ireland. What's really interesting is when you go back to that period and began tracking some of the criticisms that begin to creep in, and you've already mentioned to Edna Longley's zinger about old wines, new bottles, which is kind of visible when you explore it. But there were some other criticisms from historians. God forbid historians should ever write about theatre. Cold Dead Hand is just horrendous in relation to that. Sean Connolly started to critique about how the Ordnance Survey took place in a different period and it was more of a civilian rather than a military project. And this, you know, and I think Brian dealt with it deftly. He said, you don't go to Macbeth for history. No, these were minor bruises, you know, catch yourself on in many ways. There were other critics. Brian McAvera criticised it, feeling that perhaps the play was quite nationalist, which again I think is fundamentally undermined by the play. It's performed in English and cast a really sense of an ambivalence at the ending of the play. I do want to talk about.
Well, I think with the Brian McAvera thing, they were scraping around trying to find a Catholic who would deny the premise of the play, and he was quoted as that, you know, and I thought it was just offensive and extreme. You know, like, it would have been smart if they could have watched this play and learnt something about what the impact was culturally.
If you could take away anything from this evening, folks, I would like to quote one of the most beloved darlings in the media, who is often held up and extolled as a liberal icon of progressive politics in Ireland, and that's a certain Colin Tabine. Colin Tabine was ruled out, and this is quite astonishing, but in this period, Colin Tabine said that it is hard not to look at Field Day and see them as the literary wing of the IRA. Now, in a period in which, you know, people were being, you know, tarred as fellow travellers of the Provost and being shot, that's an astonishing thing for a writer to say about Field Day. Seamus Heaney, Seamus D, Brian Friel. And I was just wondering, what do you make of those criticisms then and now looking back on that? Because I don't think he's ever retracted that, though I did hear him talking when Brian had passed on a radio programme paying tribute to Brian, and I broke the radio throwing something at it at the time. And I was just wondering what you make of that, because it's such a reactionary, wildly offensive statement.
That was just, you know, note how I describe it, the 26 counties was reacting to radical growth in the north. They didn't want it to come that way. There's no, I mean, the theatres in Dublin were eating their hearts out because they'd lost Brian as a man whose plays could guarantee them successful premieres. And we were doing theatre the hard way around the country and getting to new audiences. So, you know, Fintan O'Toole, he was desperate to extract Brian from the politics of the North. Similarly, he, you know what they were, those people, stickies. And they were two nation theorists, you know, and it still goes on. You know, this coalition government at the moment, they really want to maintain the status quo, because if there were a united Ireland, they would be out of a job, and I would love that.
I've got about another 25 questions. I think I want to cut some of them, and it'd be lovely to get maybe
No, cut them.
Yes, we'll cut them. Anne Friel was up all night writing these as well too for me. So can I maybe have Seamus You're not falling asleep there in the back.
Thank you very much. Do the love scene.
It's too lovely on my own.
You never fall out of those.
Yolland. I'm learning to speak Irish, sir. Hugh. Good. Yolland. Roland's teaching me. Splendid. I mean, I feel so cut off from the people here. I was trying to explain a few minutes ago how remarkable a community this is. To meet people like yourself and Jimmy Jack who actually converse in Greek and Latin. And your place names. What was the one we came across this morning? Termon, from Terminus. The god of boundaries. It's really astonishing. We like to think we endure around truths immemorially posited. And your Gaelic literature, you're a poet yourself, only in Latin, I'm afraid. I understand it's an enormously rich and ornate. Indeed, Lieutenant, a rich language, a rich literature. You'll find, sir, that certain cultures expand on their vocabularies and syntax, acquisitive energies and ostentations entirely lacking in their material lives. I suppose you could call us spiritual people. Owen, not unkindly, more out of embarrassment before Yolland. Will you stop that nonsense, Father? Nonsense? What nonsense? Do you know where the nearest priest lives? Lisnamuck over near. No, he doesn't. Lisnamuck, the fort of the pigs, has become Swinefort. Now you're turning the pages of the name book, a page per name. And to get Swinefort, you pass through Green Castle and Fairhead and Strand Hill and Gort and White Plains. And the new school isn't at Paul McGuirk, it's at Sheep's Rock. Will you be able to find your way? Yes, it's a rich language, Lieutenant. Full of the mythologies of fantasy and hope and self-deception, a syntax opulent with tomorrows. It is our response to mud cabins and a diet of potatoes, our only method of replying to inevitabilities. To Owen. I'm interrupting your work. He goes to the door and stops there. Lieutenant, I understand your sense of exclusion, of being cut off from a life here, and I trust you will find access to us with my son's help. But remember that words are signals, counters. They are not immortal. And it can happen, to use an image you'll understand, it can happen that a civilization can be imprisoned in linguistic contour which no longer matches the landscape of fact. Gentlemen, he leaves. He's an astute man. He's bloody pompous, but so astute he knows what's happening. What is happening? I'm not sure, but I'm concerned about my part in it. It's eviction of sorts. We are making a 6-inch map of the country. Is there something sinister in that? Not in, and we're taking place names that are riddled with confusion, and who's confused? Are the people confused? And we're standardizing those names as accurately and as sensitively as we can. Something is being eroded. Back to the romance again. All right, fine. Look at where we've got to. He drops on his hands and knees and stabs a finger at the map. We've come to this crossroads. Come here and look at it, man. Look at it. And we call that crossroads Tubervree. And why do we call it Tubervree? Well, I'll tell you why. Tuber means a well. But what does vree mean? It's a corruption of Brian. Vreean. An erosion of Tubervreean. Because 150 years ago there used to be a well there. Not at the crossroads, mind you, that would be too simple. But in a field, close to the crossroads. And an old man called Brian, whose face was disfigured by an enormous growth, got it into his head that the water in the well was blessed. And every day for 7 months he went there and bathed his face in it. But the growth didn't go away. And one morning Brian was found drowned in that well. And ever since, the crossroads is known as Tubervree, even though that well has long since dried up. I know the story because my grandfather told it to me. But ask Dolty, or Myra, or Bridget, even my father, even Manus, why it's called Tobervree. And do you think they know? I know they don't know. So the question I put to you, Lieutenant, is this. What do we do with a name like that? Do we scrap Tobervree altogether and call it, what? The Cross? The Crossroads? Or do we keep piety with a man long dead, long forgotten, his name eroded beyond recognition, whose trivial little story nobody in the parish remembers? Except you. I've left here. I'm asking you, what do we not write in the name book? Tobervree. Even now the well is 100 yards from the actual crossroads, and there's no well anyway. What the hell does vree mean? Tobervree. That's what you want. Yes. You're certain? Fine. Fine. That's what they'll get. That's what you want too, Roland. George! For God's sake, my name is not Roland!
Stephen, sorry, I was maybe going to move on a little bit just briefly from translations, maybe to mention another play of Field Days that you were hugely involved in, both as a director and as an actor in the Riot Act. I think it's just a fascinating play because it's also mindful here in Heaney Homeplace. Seamus Heaney wrote a version of Antigone called The Burial of Thebes for the Abbey in 2004, and Tom Paul Alonso's play The Riot Act was modelled on Antigone as well. It was performed in '84 then, so it was shortly after the confrontation in the H blocks over the hunger strikes and the blanket protests that ran for 4 years. And he said himself when he wrote the Burial of Thebes, he was in some ways inspired by the standoff between Francis Hughes' family and the state over that particular funeral and the idea of burial rites and these confrontations. I was wondering, just as a director and the actor, to what extent, did the political drama in the prisons and in wider society inform and inflect that play? And to what extent do you feel, that great tragedy spoke to the situation here in the north?
Well, I just may say that when I worked a long time previously with a theatre company called Friel, it was an experimental theatre group, but we did a version of Antigone, and we used to refer to Vietnam, we used to, Ireland, so I found it quite difficult to follow that because it was very physical. There were some elements that we brought back into that, but even look, Tom used some of the language of the politics of Ireland, like we will not stand idly by, that Lynch, who was it? Yeah, Lynch said it. And I had no problem with it being absolutely predictably about here. I had no problem with that. I think Seamus didn't want that to be too clear, when he did his version. And what do you want me to say now? No, it's just there was one play that we did that you don't mention that is almost my favourite play ever, was The Communication Corps.
It's followed on from translations.
Yeah. See, this is the unbelievably smart thing about Brian, was we did Three Sisters. That's the second production, and which was a wonderfully imaginative version, which was meant. There was no question of it being changed, the setting being moved from Russia, but everybody in it spoke in their native Irish accent or their native English accent, you know. And I thought that was what was brilliant about it. I mean, Tom Kilroy did a version of The Seagull, but he moved it to Galway, so it somehow a lot of the depth was gone. Sorry, Tom, but it was gone. But then the thing was, everybody just, and then each of the Three Sisters came from a different part of Ireland, and they had the accent, the corresponding accents. But everybody got it. They got it as a Russian play because it wasn't hampered with standard English accents, you know. Well, when I was an actor in London, I used to say, why do I have to pretend to be English before I can pretend to be Russian? I mean, this is the
tradition.
Yeah, it was terrible, you know. And yeah, actually, at one point, sorry to talk about myself, but Peter Hall said to me, "You can do anything you want in this building." That was the National Theatre of Great Britain. "You can do whatever you want in this building, as long as you change your accent." So at that point, I murdered him and went for it. And I came home full of desire to make things. And that, you know, listen, to work with a man like Brian, who each of our moments in the early part of that, where he catered to them, you know. So then, when it came to what were we talking about?
I've lost the thread in a sense.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're talking about the lunacy of having to pretend to be English to play a Russian aristocrat. You know,
No, it was
using your
absurd.
own voice.
It was absolutely absurd, and you know, and everyone talking like this, you know, it's crazy. But particularly as modern standard English is nothing like, for instance, Shakespeare's. The way we speak English now is closer to Shakespeare than standard English.
And it's wonderful too that Brian gets called the Irish Chekhov in many ways, because he was one of the greatest interpreters or translators of Chekhov and Chekhovian sensibilities to an Irish setting, and he works so well. And so many Irish playwrights have pioneered that field of
It worked as
translating.
well because our language held its animation more than standard English. You know, it could go from being very upset to being weeping, and all. It had more life, and that comes from the life of the Irish language still retaining. So, sorry.
Thank you. I'm kind of conscious we're coming
Are
up
you
to
going
the.
somewhere?
I'm kind of conscious we're coming up to the hour, so it would be good to perhaps oxygenate things a little bit by having some questions from the audience, if there's anybody who would like to.
Sorry, have I ruined it by...
No. I think I'm sending people to sleep here, so I think it would be good to perhaps maybe open it up and to maybe take some questions from the floor. I don't know if we have a means or not. There's quite a few hands up, so I think we have a couple of ideas.
Communication card, just to bring you back on you were saying. It's also a favourite of mine, Friel's, and I just wanted to maybe ask why Stephen appreciated it. We just lost the thread a wee bit, and I just wanted to bring it back to that.
Oh, you lost the thread, right? No, you see, the thing is, Brian, he wrote a farce, you know. See, that's the skill of the guy, you know. I mean, Anne and Brian and I sat and watched the farce in London, and you know, he was getting how it all worked, you know. But the point was that he wanted to show that he wanted to take fun out of his own work. You know, people were saying pretentious things about translations, and so that's why he had the senator coming on talking about the Irish language and being very pompous about it and everything. And he wanted to show that, you know, he'd moved on. But I actually found it was one of the most fun things I've ever done.
I think there's another question.
There's Anne.
Stephen didn't do
What?
the love scene in translations.
Yes,
You didn't mention it.
I did mention it, but he didn't do it.
Seamus, you're home.
I don't have to see home. If you give me 2 minutes,
Well, we have a shave as well.
But I think you mentioned the Ukrainian production of it. That love scene was just astonishing between the two lovers there. Could you maybe reflect a little bit just about that particular kind of scene and how that works so well? It's something that is kind of scalded into your consciousness once you see it. It's such a sublime moment of theatre.
Well, it's a raw scene of love, you know, and they're trying to communicate through the place names, yeah. And it means that when you find out that he's gone, he's been killed, it's devastating, you know. Yeah.
The thing that fundamentally connects him is what separates him, the language. Yeah, it's astonishing.
No, it's an extraordinary scene, yeah, of course. But I mean, it's word perfect, that play, you know.
A few other questions?
We referred to the timelessness of some of the themes in Brian's work, and especially the way in which translation is now often cited in the context of scholarship around the ecological crisis and climate justice. And I know you've been very receptive, Stephen, to those conversations and the ways in which those words in Brian's work can give us some insight into the importance of the relationship between language, the land, and our ecological histories. And you very kindly invited Amitav Ghosh to deliver the lecture in 2024 to help us to explore some of those connections. Could I just invite you to reflect a little bit about some of those connections and the way in which the work has taken on a new life in some ways in the work of Michael Croman and Sinead Mercer and others?
Well, you know, I don't think most of us weren't, at the time in 1980, weren't so hugely conscious about the whole question of climate change, you know. But, I mean, it was you wrote interestingly about it. It was time to think about not just losing a territory, but losing part of our world, you know, or maybe all of our world. And so that's why with you, I've tried to do some things that were what Remains of Field Day is trying to address the whole question of the planet, you know, and particularly about Loch Ness, for instance, which is shocking, and you know, and then it's not just Loch Ness. There's also Our Lady's Loch in Wexford, so we can't just blame an outside government for being responsible. The Irish government is responsible for that and that area is destroyed, maybe destroyed forever, you know. But I'm not making any sense, am I? Am I? No, it's. But I think that you know, that's what we know, that the whole intention of imperialism, as we've seen all over the world. When we're talking about Amitav Ghosh, he says the northern hemisphere is at war with the southern hemisphere because we need everything they've got. And you know what the English did here was they needed the trees. You know, as they say, Ireland was, before the Elizabethan conquest, Ireland was the most forested country in Europe, and it is still today the least forested. You know, they got their boats to go and conquer the rest of the world, go to Amitav's place in Indonesia and get all the nutmegs. My God, you know. So huge wars over nutmegs. But you know, sorry, I can't be any more. I mean, we're looking at we're looking at China and Russia and Northern Korea. We're looking at the world being. I mean, we're heading for it, aren't we? And yeah, you know. Sorry.
Maybe one more question.
Hello, yes. Hi, Stephen, how are you? I was just wondering, you know, you've got a good sense of humour, and when you laugh, do you think you laugh in Irish or English?
Sorry, I can hear you.
Sorry. I think you've got a good sense of humour, so I was wondering, when you laugh, do you laugh in Irish or English? Or Scottish?
Oh, definitely Irish.
Oh, right.
I hope. Yeah.
Good word.
Of course I will.
Thanks very much for the great talk. Just a question on the fifth province, the language of province being provincial, coming from Vincic to conquer, and when you think of region, it's also Rex, the king, and county is a count, so there's always a power associated with a province. In the Irish language, it's a Cuigu, which is a fifth, a language of sharing, not talking about the Irish, but the actual word. I suppose my question would be, given that the fifth province was historically in the middle of Ireland, it was protected from erosion, all other provinces weren't. It was perhaps a sanctuary in itself. And just to quickly point out, I was born in a place called Altnagelvin, which is referencing to the birds have gone, and as Stephen mentioned about the forestry dairy, the oaks have been cut down since. And as O'Hara was talking about the terminus, when I read it when I was a boy, I thought Brian Friel must have been very clever, because obviously in Charman there's a sanctuary, it doesn't come from terminus. So the fifth province, in my mind, would have been a sanctuary. But my question is, to whom or to what does it owe? And how can it be protected if it's a fifth province as well of the imagination? I'm working on a film, a bit of a Quatoxian endeavour, but in view of what you've been speaking about tonight, I suppose how can that, whether the work itself or the province be protected and remain a sanctuary? And finally, I would say on Anne's question about the love scene, that the word that comes to mind is always. And then we have a saying in Irish, which is "Imi and the Dini, a fun in the crick," which the people come and people go. Imi and the Dini, the people go, but the mountains remain, the hills remain. But Brian Friel has very well showed an elegy and an irony that that's not true. Because these things do go, and always isn't the case. But can it be always?
You should have been up here. Stephen, anything you want to say?
I've talked to this man before, and he wants to do a film of translations. And you explained away my nervousness about destroying the language thing in the centre of it all, you know. I think you did, didn't you? Maybe you'd say it again, no? No? No, okay.
You're sitting beside my daughter who seemed to squeeze in there. I'm just mindful, just a few years ago I took her to Marrow in Donegal because I told her all these epic fables about this enormous sand dune that was just huge. You could go down to the sheer side of it on the other end of it, and we walked around for about an hour and a half looking for it, and it was gone. And they all think it's just some confabulation of mine because I often tend to amplify stories, you know. And then we turned out, we were in the singing pub afterwards, and we found out that in the storm it blew away in one night. But then about 6 months later, the beaches were washed up in English bathrooms. So I mean, that idea that always, even the landscape, the only thing that's constant is change. So, but that was, it was a beautiful reflection, and it'd be lovely to have. I think it would also be lovely. I think we're mindful of the time as well too, folks. But there's a lovely scene at the end of translations when Jimmy Jacket and Hugh are talking, and Hugh talks about their McElroy rule in '98, and they talk about walking 23 miles, but they only get as far as Glenties, and they end up in Phelan's pub, and their pietas is for quieter things. Now there isn't a Phelan's pub, unfortunately, outside, but maybe we could have a few libations kind of next door and continue some of those conversations. But before we do that, can I please ask you all to show your appreciation for a fascinating conversation with Stephen, and also with Seamus here for his wonderful